Hi, I'm here to talk about some of the future of the Bonsai Echo channel. Some of the things you'll be seeing coming up are going to be based on suggestions that I've asked for. And I have a list right here that I'll be reading off and talking about my thoughts on those, when you should expect to see those videos. And also I'll be going over a little bit of one of the suggestions that I think will fit in for today. Let's get started on this. So I recently asked my Instagram and Facebook audience, what kind of things would you like to see on the Bonsai Echo channel? What's important to you? What do you find relatable? And maybe even what are you missing on the other channels? There's some great ones out there and there's a lot of knowledge to be shared, so I'll just do my part and see what I can do. The first one happens to be my origin story. So how did I come to get interested in bonsai? What was it like as a new person to it? How did I advance and where am I at now? And for me, that is the origin story, and it brings me to the point of talking about the future of what I do in bonsai. So I will be getting to that in just a little bit after I go over some of the other suggestions. One of them being maple pruning. Maples are one of my favorite, if not my very favorite, types of trees for bonsai, and for just trees in general. Japanese maples like these ones behind me, I just really love them. They're the ones that speak to me the most. I really feel connected to them. The trimming is very therapeutic. It's a great way to spend an hour or 20 minutes or any time that I have available. The Japanese maples are just, they're a lot of fun to me. I'll definitely be talking about that. And I will focus on some specific timing and also how to ramify deciduous trees like Japanese maples. Pot selection, this one is going to be a little different one because I have a different take on selecting pots and other containers for bonsai. I learned, like many other people did, that plants in bonsai have a front and a back and sides, and so most of my pots that I've been collecting over the years have turned into being ovals and rectangles because that's the way that I learned. It made sense to me. I'm actually completely clearing out all of my front-centric pots, is what I'm calling them. I'm selling them off and then replacing them with some other pots that I feel fit a more 360-degree approach to bonsai. Let me show you an example. Here's one from Mudvayne's studio, and you notice it's a round. It appears to be a wheel-thrown carved container with a really interesting finish. And one of the nicest things about wheel-thrown containers is that the ting, the bell sound. This is a really great container by Mudvayne, and I love the colors. The depth really I think will fit with something very interesting. It's got either like a bark or a stone look to it. And this is some of the more interesting sort of things that I'm looking for in my selections of containers. And this will allow me to turn the tree any way I want, regardless of what I think a front should be. So I'll be talking a lot more about that in the future. Collecting is something else that's interesting to people, and they'd like to know more about how do I collect from the wild, and also how do I find good material right in my neighborhood. I have talked about this a little bit. Collecting from the wild is not something I do that much. I find that there's beautiful trees out there, and I typically remember that beauty in my head and then apply that to one of my trees that I have here at home. And some of the trees that I have here at home were collected trees. Let me show you an example. This is a tree that I did not collect, but I did style based off of some images that I saw on a trip to Mount Rainier National Forest. In that National Forest and many others, a permit is required in order to collect plant material. So it's very similar to, say, a Christmas tree permit where you go to the ranger office and you pay 20 bucks and they allow you to collect a certain number of trees. This would just be different because you're not trying to kill the tree, you're trying to keep it alive. This particular one was part of a group that I bought in summer or spring, and it had been collected the previous fall in private property that happened to be up in the hillsides. This is a mountain hemlock, and I was able to actually get it into this size of a pot because it had such great roots. So this one is, again, based off of the images that I've seen out in the wild, but is not actually collected from the wild. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that, and also comparing that to urban dory, if you will, locally collected from people's yards or businesses or even on the roadsides. And those are great pieces of material with very good age, maybe 50 years if you're lucky, and that's plenty to start a bonsai with. Also, with it being usually plants that are going to be discarded anyways, burnt, thrown in the dumpster, buried, chopped up for firewood, I just really feel drawn to rescuing those plants, and that's become a large part of my bonsai journey right now, and I'll be talking about that quite a bit more in the collecting segments. Fertilization is another thing people wanted to hear about. When do I use fertilizer? What kind of fertilizer components should I use? What's the difference between spring, summer, and fall fertilizer? How about wintertime? Tropicals, when I have them indoors, do I still fertilize indoors? And I'll be able to talk about most of those things that I have experience with. The ones that I don't have experience with, I get to learn about, which is exciting to me in my bonsai journey because I always want to learn. One quote that I saw recently was actually from Michelangelo at age 87, and his quote was, "I'm still learning." So yeah, even the most famous artists that were famous because of their beautiful works were always learning, and I aspire to be just like that. So we will be talking more about fertilization, and I'll get to learn some along the way also. Working with starter plants. How do I work with those? How do I trim them? How do I shape them? Should I repot them right away? Should I put them in the ground or in a bonsai pot? Or what are just good techniques for the most common starter plants? You know, things like juniper, tropical trees like ficus. There'll be several other ones that I'll be talking about and showing some examples of, because that's a suggestion that I really do like. One thing that I'm going to be looking to do is some more demos of an easy way to treat new material and how to keep it healthy at the same time. We'll be talking about that quite a bit. Easy to find bonsai soil components. This is going to be very location specific. In the Pacific Northwest, I have access to materials that I can find just down the road. Cinder, pumice, Douglas fir bark, all kinds of great stuff that works really wonderfully for bonsai and works great in my environment. And it will be very different if you're in a different type of climate where your bonsai soil components can be different. So again, this will be something I can speak to pretty confidently in my area, and I'll be able to learn a little bit more from people that I know in the rest of the country and the world on what components they feel they can get locally. And I'll be able to combine that into a form where we can talk about where to find these, roughly how much the cost is, what to do with them, and then combine them into a great bonsai soil mix to keep your plants healthy. This one's an interesting one. Apex versus leaf pad formation. This is definitely a challenge. Leaf pads, it's going to be very different depending on the type of image you're going for, and they may not even be pads. Not all trees actually form pads of foliage like a pine might do. Maples in particular have kind of a tiered sort of look to them from the outside. Many of the tall trees in the world don't seem to have any sort of pads. Giant sequoias are just crazy, as are, say, western red cedars. Some other trees have a very rounded entire form. All trees have some sort of a top point. The furthest point from the ground that has foliage on it, we call it the apex. And apexes in bonsai are very interesting. It's generally thought of that an apex in bonsai should be a round form because that expresses age. It's no longer got an upright growth because it's reached the highest point that it's going to grow, and now at that point the lower branches catch up until it makes a domed peak. Well, that does happen. Yes, that is something that can happen in trees of great age. One thing you'll very commonly see in trees of great age is that as they get taller, they're also more subject to the damages of nature, also age or insects, and the domed area on the top of an old tree gets to be very ragged very quickly, and there could be times where it has that beautiful dome shape, and there's many times where they'll have sections that are broke off and another apex will come out on the side or lower down. And there's some very interesting old trees, I say trees, not bonsai, very interesting old trees in the wild that have no look of what a bonsai would look like. And I will be talking more about why those are especially attractive to me and interesting to me, and why I'm going to strive to do much more of that in my work. So that one's a really great topic to talk about. Wisteria. I haven't talked much about wisteria on this channel, and I've only really worked with wisteria a little bit. I've had 4 really great wisteria in my bonsai career. Each one of them have been up for sale, and I've sold almost all of them. Apparently they're good enough that people like them, so I believe that I can talk a little bit more about styling and growing them. They are, for me, they're my favorite when they have no leaves. Wintertime and spring are my favorite season for wisteria. They just really look like a big hairy mess during the rest of the year. But we'll be able to talk a lot about how to acquire wisteria, how to train them because they're not always that easy, and how to keep them watered because they really drink and guzzle the water. And we'll talk about developing flowers on wisteria. That can be quite elusive if the plant is really maintained quite a bit and clipped quite a bit, which is something that happens in bonsai training. We'll definitely talk about wisteria quite a bit more. Rosemary, this one surprisingly popular to me. Rosemary I hadn't heard much about until I mentioned it, and then just like when you start looking for a certain car, or maybe your family is going to have a baby, all of a sudden there's that same car, or all of a sudden there's babies everywhere. So this happened to me with rosemary bonsai. I hadn't seen it so much, but once you start looking for it, it's really all over. And I had a lot of people say that that's one of their favorites, that rosemary is great for bonsai, and they had a lot of things to say about it, and I'd love to share that with you all too as I start to work with rosemary quite a bit more. I have one particular specimen in my yard that I'd really like to dig up, but sometimes you really have to consider if that's the right thing to do, so we'll talk through that process too. Detail work on any of my trees was the last suggestion I have so far. And that is something that I'm definitely going to show quite a bit more. I have a self-taught way of doing things. I have never taken any formal training for bonsai. I've learned from books and more recently some videos, but most of it has been hands-on. It has been myself teaching my hands and my mind how to deal with wire and clippers and where to trim on the trees to get the desired results. And I have learned through some failures. I was not great at it when I started, and I did get quite a bit better with it. Now, after about two decades of doing bonsai, I feel pretty comfortable talking about my experience and what's worked for me. And I know that there's some really much faster ways of doing things than I do it, I suppose. But part of my origin story is learning patience through bonsai. I'm not in that much of a rush to make bonsai happen that fast. I'm not driving a race car. I'm actually working with a living thing, and my intention is to keep it alive and healthy and looking good and reflecting an image that I've seen that I really connect to. So my detail work on my trees is focused on making them look more like trees more recently. I will have some that just are crazy looking, like this one right here, this dogwood. I've never seen that image before, but there's something that I've seen in my mind that I'm connecting to, and it's reflecting in my work there. So I'll talk a lot more about what echoes to me, Bonsai Echo. That's the reason why I have that name. What that comes from and what I try to get across on my images. So those are great suggestions. I would love to hear them. Keep coming in. Please put them down in the comments on this video if you'd like to see some other things. One thing that was interesting to me is that on the suggestions that I requested, no one had actually asked for air layering videos. Now I know on YouTube air layering is very, very popular. In fact, the times where I've showed a video where I should have air layered according to the viewers and I didn't air layer, I definitely got some backlash on that. You know, you should have air layered this. I did make a video discussing what I decide to air layer, my decision-making process for when I chop versus air layer, the value I see, and how to determine if I'm going to do that process. And I have picked up quite a bit of material throughout fall and now that is intended for making many air layers on my way to shortening the plant. And the reason why I've decided to do that is because the timing will be quite right in spring and summer to do that. Whereas if I'm in the late summer, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to try to air layer a plant. So I do have to consider things like that. Feel free to watch that video to discuss it a little bit more. Alright, so let's talk about my origin story. So for those of you that haven't seen this channel very much, my name is Jared. I'm originally from Northern California. Now when I say Northern California, I mean an hour south of Oregon. So very much Northern California, near Redding, California. So I grew up within about 60 miles of Redding. I lived in that area the entire time that I was in California. I lived by Bernie Falls Park for quite a while in a little town called Castle. I grew up there and walked uphill in the snow both directions to go to school, that sort of thing. Spent a lot of time outside when I was living in the small town of Castle. I ran, mountain biked, cross-country skied, and I was just outside all the time. I remember as a younger person, I was coming home on my bike and it was dark, and my parents had just headed out to try to find me because I just wouldn't come back. So that's really stuck with me. I really get a lot from being outside, and it's something that my family still today, during the time when it's nice, if I'm not outside, they're wondering how I'm feeling. Am I sick? So as you can hear in my voice right now, I am kind of suffering from a cold, but here I am outside, you know, at least in the greenhouse. But so I decided that the weather in California was not really for me. I love the outdoors, but I didn't love being hot outdoors. In the Northern California area where I lived was the north end of the Central Valley. It was very windy. It worked kind of like some sort of a swirling, gusty, nasty hotness. It just wasn't for me. It got up to 120 degrees. It was much like being in Arizona, but just with more wind. The wind didn't stop in the wintertime either. There was a lot of wind that would blow trees over. You know, wind happens everywhere, but when you combine that with the heat, that just wasn't for me. So I decided in 1999 that it was time for me to move somewhere, and I was considering different areas of the country. Colorado came to mind, somewhere around Boulder was interesting to me. Also outdoorsy, was into snowboarding at the time. Also I considered Washington, and I happened to have moved in with some roommates that I worked with, and it was only 3 months into living with them in a rental home that we had, and they said, "Jared, we're gonna move to Seattle. You wanna come with?" I didn't know what to do. I wanted to move somewhere, and this opportunity just dropped right in front of me. And I said, let's go up and look at it, and then I'll decide. And we did. We went up and stayed at my roommate's brother's house in Linwood, Washington. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do was move up to Washington area, near Seattle. I'm just south of Seattle now, in the view of the beautiful Mount Rainier. So when we moved up here, we stayed roommates, and we lived in some different apartments, which wasn't really conducive to bonsai. But that didn't stop me from finding my first bonsai nursery. I had started to see some when I came over here, and it was really interesting to me, because my mom had also recently gotten into it, and so I kind of had an idea what bonsai was about. And so there's a little bit more of a bonsai community around the Seattle area of Washington. And I connected to that pretty quickly. I found my first bonsai, which was a Chinese elm, and I got it from Asia Pacific Gardening in Kent, Washington. And that was a very good bonsai. Chinese elm are great for beginner bonsai. That survived my Nubian flailings for about a whole year before it finally died. I just kept on trimming it, trying to get it to the shape I wanted. I never let it grow. I repotted it twice in a year. I did all the things that you're not supposed to do, and of course it did die. At that point I knew that I needed to learn what the world I was doing. So I started getting books. I got several books. Subscribed to the Bonsai Today magazine, which is now a Bonsai Focus. I started going to nurseries and buying plants and testing the ideas that come out of the book. I got wire and some tools, and I started applying those techniques to the plants that I got, and my plants did still die. I still had the whole Nubian thing going. It took me about 3 years before I started having plants that I could consistently work on, and they would consistently live through it. So within the first 5 years, I really developed pretty quickly as far as someone who's self-taught. Now that's a little different because there's a lot of places nowadays where you can learn from an experienced person and accelerate that growth if that's what you want to do. At the time, that's not something I even thought about. I've always been a self-teacher. I've always found that I'm very stubborn about doing it my way. And you know what, sometimes I punish myself by having plants that die. But in the long run, I still feel confident that that was the path I was supposed to be on. The opportunity to move to Seattle just fell into my path, and I took that opportunity. And then the opportunity to get into bonsai when I moved up to here also fell in my path. I took that again. And I've just found more and more often throughout the years that if you are looking for opportunity, it will find you. Just like nowadays, after 2 decades of working with bonsai, within about the last 8 months, I actually was laid off from a 20-year career in warehousing. Now I had worked my way up a little bit, and I was supervising teams. There was some bit of satisfaction from doing that, but it was never the same as when I would work on my bonsai at the end of the day and the weekends. So when that layoff happened, I saw it as an opportunity to really do more with bonsai, share my knowledge, really help people out that would like it. Not everyone's as stubborn as I am, and they're willing to ask for help. And I've learned over the years that as stubborn as I am with bonsai, I still do seek to learn things. And if somebody's willing to teach, I'm going to listen. So I'm hoping that same community is out there in the social media area, and also just in bonsai in general, that there's a learning community out there, and I really want to foster that. Something that's important to me is helping people along on their journey, also promoting other artists that I feel support that same sort of outlook. And that's why you'll see more artists like Yana from a recent video who does bonsai ceramics, does a great job with those. It's important to me to promote other people in similar fields, like there's artistic tree trimming that I would like to show you all some more of. I have a few connections there that people are really great at what they do, and I'm trying to convince these people that it would be great to share with an audience. So that's some of the things that's important to me. Doing bonsai is something that is just very relaxing, very therapeutic, and you could do it with music. You could do it quiet if you're into hearing the snips and the clacks of wire dropping. You can get out into nature. You could do it in your home. It's a small bit of nature that you can hold in your hand, and it's a tactile sensation of nature that you may not have access to in other ways very easily. Bonsai can be kept with several trees on a balcony in an apartment. As long as you can keep them alive, you can connect with nature. So I'm very fortunate that I've taken the opportunities that have come upon my way, and I've developed an area here in my own yard here. that works great for bonsai, and I have knowledge that I can share, which I'm going to continue to do. So thank you again for all your suggestions. Anybody who's watching and gave me these, pat yourself on the back, because those are great things that I'm really excited to talk about. And definitely please leave any other comments in the comment section. Any comments are fine. There's no such thing as bad comments. I do ask that you try to make it a learning atmosphere, because that's what I'm here for. I will respond to as many comments as I possibly can, even the ones that may not seem easy to answer right away. I'll try to figure it out. I'll do what I can to share my knowledge and share what I've learned with you as I go on my journey here. Yeah, so that's me. That's some plans for videos in the future, and I'll be talking more about what Bonsai Echo is going to be all about as I go through these videos, and you'll be able to see some revolutions and natural evolutions of what I do. Thank you very much.